continually to notify its housing. And if it isn't housing on one door, it's the next door and that's the first side. It's coming from people who are directly affected by housing. It's coming from people who know others who are directly affected by housing. And it is coming from those who are just sheerly appalled at how our dysfunctional housing policy has got to where it is today. That's how this meeting came about. We thought this is a time for political debate. It is a time for us as Fianna Fáil to play our stall. I often hear people saying, what is the difference between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? I think it's important for us to enunciate to people what it is we want to deliver in terms of housing policy. It's the biggest issue in our state at the moment. It's going to have long-term ramifications down the line for generations to come yet. I'd like to thank Darragh. I know you're in a rush to the warm embrace of I can get you and I trust they will welcome you warmly. Which have outlined Fianna Fáil's policy very well, and I hope people can see that and can maybe now differentiate where we stand. Now, far from the muddy pitches of Cllr that we are tonight, but it's important for us to understand where we are at sometimes. And I know some of what Mel was talking about can knock us back a little bit because it does show the stark reality of where we're at. But it's important for us to know that. I'd like to thank Mel for coming out and giving this time because it is a very succinct and a very direct way for us to understand where the market's at and what needs to happen. Bill, thank you. It was a great speech. I wish I was as eloquent as you. But the good news on the horizon for us is this. As Mel has alluded to, we have land banks. So it is possible to do things. There are solutions with Cllr and Co-Housing Alliance. So we know things can happen. So from my perspective, this is what I'm saying to you. So I'm a candidate to the election on the 24th of May. If I was successful, I would like to be at a local level, albeit we still require an awful lot to happen in the Dáil, but at a local level to be a supporter of the Cllr housing model. I think it makes utter sense, and it is something that can resolve a lot of our housing issues in the area. So thank you for your time, thanks to the speakers, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you to Michael and Justin for that. Now, questions. So, some questions.
Can I hit you with the first question?
Well, 1 second, Bill. Hold on.
One quick question. In the case of land banks,
yeah.
What brings us up to date on this story about the O'Leary owned land at Mount Merion? Because there's rumours about it being sold off. Or what's the story about the O'Leary land bank at Mount Merion?
Yeah, that's the old depot there
the old depot,
in Mount Merion. Yeah. So basically, it was in the news recently on the basis that there was an element of that site, a very small portion of that site, that had a traveller accommodation symbol on it. And the traveller accommodation programme is currently out on public consultation. And it no longer has that symbol on it, i.e. there is no traveller accommodation site located on the Mount Merion depot. And therefore, it is the depot up for sale without any restrictions or any other provisions on it. So that is why, traditionally for the last, I think it's 5 years, it had the traveller accommodation programme.
But why is the O'Leary Council selling it?
Well, that's a good question in itself, but
why
traditionally
it's
been
using it
yes,
as a land bank?
Absolutely. But traditionally, it was probably about long before this crisis really hit. Bearing in mind, Darragh alluded to it, and so did Mel in their own presentations. If you had, if you went back, say, 7 years or so, there was an emerging crisis of housing because there was no supply, be it public or private housing. And now it's become more acute. But before that hit home, the council, as part to fund part of its capital programme, it earmarked sites that it had that it thought could yield the best return to fund its capital programme. And that in itself included the Mount Merion site, as well as other sites were earmarked. The one on Rochestown Avenue at the corner of Sallynoggin Road and Rochestown Avenue, that was a site that was earmarked. That since hasn't proceeded to sale. Another previous county manager had proposed the George's Depot site, which Mel referred to in his presentation, an award-winning site there on George's Place in O'Leary, and the old fire station. Thankfully, that didn't proceed to sale, and that's no longer looking for to be sold. But given what both Bill and Mel and indeed Darragh has said, we do need to look at what we actually own, rather than the traditional model, which was selling the most lucrative sites for the development and for the return to the council.
So are you going to hold those sites now?
Well, the Marion Depot is still currently out for, I think they're out, I think it's out in the potential list of for sale. I think the list, the site.
Why not build on it?
No, absolutely, and that's something that we need to look at. But it's, that in itself, what I'm saying is in the last 7 years, it's changed. The councils, all councils, looked at valuable sites and looked to sell. But now the housing crisis hit home. It's now time to look at those.
Could I add something very briefly to that? Because at a national level, the push has actually been, I mentioned the Land Development Agency, which was created by the government, which still, by the way, doesn't have any statutory powers, no legislation yet. But the thrust behind that is, to the local authorities, they've taken land banks, is to sell. And to sell, and the return would be a small percentage of affordable and social housing. In my own area in Donabate, there's a site there, Ballinstone, about 60 acres. The council have actually said, well, it's okay that they get 10% social, 20% affordable, and the rest will go to private, but they'll be selling it on, and we don't want that to happen. So in some instances, though, if we were to get in next week, if there was to be a general election, could I stop Ballinstone from being sold right now? Probably not. But we look at all the other land banks that Mel has alluded to and I alluded to there, there's massive potential for us to partner with people like School on the Road Mel on numerous occasions. Their model works, and there's other models as well, where we can deliver on serviced zoned land. But that has been a strategy, and it is a policy decision that others can answer for, is to sell and get housing built in return.
And the key element there is the word serviced. A lot of those sites the council look.
But it's hard to understand why you can't do direct building yourselves on that side and just get.
Yeah, but as I say, that's the change that has occurred.
But is that going to take
place? No, but it hasn't happened yet. So we can look at it, absolutely. Any other question?
Just the equity stake, 40% is fully repayable, and that's a problem. I don't know of any bank that will give a mortgage on the basis of that.
And just to answer that, I've discussed the charge issue as well with Hugh and yourself, Bill, as well, and others in the market. That could be an issue as to how the charge works. But the equity stake as well, that's a draft plan that we have. Would not necessarily have to be repaid back. That the stake could be held.
I know, but the stress. Like I prefer the clause like 20 years. It's no hassle. You know what I mean? People own this house, and don't forget, like 800 years, the land was taken off. And I'm saying every Irish man, in my opinion, we're hearing this rubbish of go for rental and all this nonsense. I never, man or woman, Canada, all the guys in Ireland, like Canada, England, blah blah blah. They all want to come back home and own their house cash for 20 years. That's the reality.
Can you just explain to me what Bill's referring to in the draft plan that we have is the equity stake, so a shared ownership type arrangement, okay? We have discussed this with financial institutions as well, and they will be willing to work with it because you're selling the homes at around 200,000. That it's a good model for a mortgage for a lender. So we'd be looking at private lending. So you go out to PTSB, you get your mortgage by. Well, and some of them are willing to use them as one example. That money, when you buy your home, goes back into the affordable housing pot, right? So it's ring fenced. It goes back into that pot. Now, the shared ownership piece. The reason why we looked at that because when we did clawback on the previous affordable scheme, the clawback wasn't severe enough in my view. People did flip homes at the time. So you could make a call to say, well, I'm going to, now, Cllr has a longer clawback period than the previous one. So we're working that through. We have met with some of the lenders. We've met with yourselves, as you know, and other stakeholders to get feedback to tweak it. The bottom line is that an affordable scheme will work.
The problem is that say it's 100 grand or whatever, roughly, and you're talking about inflation for the next 20 or 30 years or 40 years. It's a lot of stress to have on the fella's back or company's back.
Yeah, no. It's and you're looking at probably about 20% of the home itself. That's what you're looking at, probably the maximum. We are looking at.
Okay, we're going to take two questions together then.
Good point, Bill.
Go ahead.
I want to know how people chosen to go on this list of what Cllr have if and when they do get land to build on.
Okay, that's fine. And I'll take the second question together then.
Well, it's just a couple of observations and then I just want to ask a
Okay, well, we'll come back to that. So, Bill, you might answer that then, how people get on the O'Coulon list
Yeah, you
for
can
the
just,
affordable
just
housing.
go onto our website and